Hi, my name is Clare and I'm the mother of 3 teenagers with FASD.
I'm Jessica, a PhD researcher specialising in educational interventions for children with FASD.
And together we are the hosts of Spotlight on FASD, the UK's first podcast dedicated to shining a spotlight on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
FASD is a condition caused by prenatal alcohol exposure that affects hundreds of thousands of children across the UK.
And we're here to bring these conversations out of the shadows and make sure that no one living with FASD feels alone.
Hi, and welcome back to the next episode of Spotlight on FASD. We are here with another episode talking about education and really focusing on what learning professionals and education professionals need to know. So the really key pieces of information about FASD. So if you're dealing with it in your school, in your classroom, or you suspect you are, this will be like a quick roundup of
like top tips, maybe kind of top tips kind of thing, because it's such a complex topic, and we've been trying to pull together like if you were I was asking the question, if I was a teacher or a learning support assistant or any kind of education professional dealing with a child with FASD or suspected FASD, what are the key things that I would really, really need to know? And I think one of the huge positives about this disability is that the adjustments that need to be made aren't very difficult to make. They're not complex at all. They're not complicated. They don't cost a lot of money. And they don't require any kind of an intensive training. They just require you to think in a different way. And I think one of the key areas is they require you to think much younger. A phrase that I always use is lower your expectations and think toddler, and that's largely linked to attachment and trauma. But I have found that throughout life it does, certainly when a child or a young person is dysregulated, it does apply to FASD. And if you go in at that level instead of this level, that's only going to work for the people watching on YouTube, not listening on the podcast. But if you go in at if your expectation is at a slightly lower level, it's going to make life easier for everyone. And you're not letting anyone off with anything, or you're not kind of being easy on anyone. You're just making a perfectly reasonable adjustment for a very real disability. Mm-hmm. Which is the minimum that we should be doing anway.
The challenge there, which we have to acknowledge because it's a very, very real challenge, and it's something that I've just sent off a chapter of my PhD yesterday, and it was pretty much central around this. The challenge is that it's hidden. You can't see it. So we've spoken about this before. What is stood in front of you maybe a 10, 11-year-old child, and you don't see any signs of this disability, but you do because of behavioural traits and things like that, but there are no visible signs of a physical disability in the individual that you're talking to, yet you have to shift your thinking and your expectations down to what you'd expect from a 4 or 5-year-old, and that's hard. That's tricky, and it's tricky to remember. Really, really tricky.
You have to make that actual. Your brain doesn't compute that automatically. You have to force your brain to think in a different way, and it's really, really difficult. And well over a decade in, I still find that I still have to remind myself when I'm not doing it. And I would like to think it comes naturally to me, but it doesn't, because it's human nature. You're going against the grain of everything that is common sense and everything that you would think would be the response or the thing to do in any given situation. And I think that something that I've found when it comes to, as a human, when you are interacting with another human, generally the way you converse with each other and the language that you use, you're making these assumptions, and you talk to someone and you automatically, you don't even know you're doing it, you kind of communicate back at the same level with them. When it comes to children and young people, especially teenagers with FASD, quite often they talk a really good talk, and they can appear to be even a little bit older than they are. And it's this, like, they're like chameleons. It is this such a skill, such a level of survival skill that they've honed over the years. So that throws you off as well. And so you could find yourself arguing with yourself, thinking, well, that surely can't all be going on there, because she's just run rings around me in an argument. But it is, and this is what, there's so much blind faith required, really, to accepting this disability. Literally blind faith, because you can't see what is going on. And in the classroom, that looks like, I know you touched on a lot of this, but it looks like silliness, cheekiness, belligerence, defiance, just being argumentative, inappropriate behaviour. That's what it can look like.
What society would label as a naughty child misbehaving.
Yeah, naughty, behavioural problems, and actually they're all just symptoms of a devastating brain injury. And I know I've said it so many times before, if a child or a young person would have a hideous accident and sustain a brain injury, society would do everything they possibly could to make life easier. And as a bare minimum, we would ensure that that child could access their legal right of gaining an education in the way that fit them, in a way that they were able to. And that is absolutely not the case with FASD. Now it will be, and we see this all the time, it will be in the future, but it's not now. But so as education professionals, you are able to make a very real difference to the education that children and young people with FASD are accessing at the minute, in a variety of different settings, whether you're in a classroom, whether you're tutoring somebody, an education expert, working with a child in their own home, in whatever capacity you are dealing with a child with FASD, there are some key areas that if you know about them and if you make these adjustments, it will make a huge, like a life-changing difference to these children and young people. And I would say, I've got like a little list of things, but I would say, speaking as a mother who is trying to survive getting her children through education, the sensory input, we talk about it all the time, but as a teacher or a learning support assistant, whatever role it is that you play, when it comes to the sensory side of things, something to be really careful of is to just be mindful of that child not becoming overstimulated, because a sensory overstimulation will take a lot to bring down and to change gears and to get down from. So and this is the awful thing, that quite often that could be because it's something amazing's happened, or they've done something really, really well, and they're getting themselves in, you know, if they're getting a lot of praise, which is lovely, but also, yeah, like it's really difficult, like a feeling of pride, that can all add towards this huge, big sensory kind of overstimulation, becoming over aroused. And then chances are, when you think of how, certainly if you're talking about a classroom environment, think of how a school day is figured out, chances are they've then got to switch up and do a transition to either a break time or a play time or a lunch time or a change of lesson. and that's just then impossible. They cannot change. It's like they're in 5th gear on a motorway, and then they've got to be instantly into 1st gear trying to go around a roundabout, and it just can't happen, and there's going to be a crash. So being careful that that doesn't happen, and being mindful that, you know, quite often a lot of classrooms, especially Key Stage 1, where you want them, you think it's lovely that they've got so many resources on the walls and so much stuff going on, but for a child with FASD, very similar to autism, that is just something that they cannot cope with. And if you think the bulk of FASD kids are trying to survive in mainstream school, that is a really, really big deal for them. So even if you know that that's what you're dealing with, even if you can find a less, you know, a view that is less of a sensory overload for them, that could make a huge, huge difference.
Which might be, and it's not obvious, but that might be facing a window. Now, obviously, that's not something that you would think of, because if you've got people walking past, or you've got birds flying past, or you've got changes in weather and everything, that could be more manageable than a view into the classroom where you can see other children moving around and there's all the static stimulation on the walls behind them. So it's about like reframing it and really, really getting to know the individual that you're working with, and what it is that I don't want to say triggers them, but what it is that, you know, overstimulates them.
Yeah, but then it is a trigger. It is
a trigger. It is, yeah.
It is, you know, and it's something that they've got no control over themselves. So as the adult in charge of the situation, we have to be the one with control over that. And we know about it now. We know better, so we do better. So we are sharing this with you, that when it comes to FASD, sensory overload is the absolute last thing that they need. And it will make a huge, huge difference to how they're able to cope and navigate through their day. One of the biggest, I'm predominantly thinking of primary school when I say this, but actually it applies right across the board. One of the most difficult parts of a school day for a child with FASD to navigate is unstructured time. So it's all the nice times. It's the times that most children look forward to and enjoy the most. So it's break times, play times, lunch time, assemblies, walking to a classroom if something different's going to be happening, anything that is out of the ordinary of being inside the setting that they are used to. And we have to keep our children safe. We have to protect them from what could potentially happen when they're in a situation like that. They have got no or very little impulsivity control. They don't link cause and effect. So, you know, they are excited and happy to be out in the playground. And then, you know, they will typically be the child that after 5 minutes, oh, what's happened now? What's he done now? They will be that child. And actually, if that child was meant to be in a wheelchair and every playtime we took the wheelchair away from them and like launched them off into the yard, oh, have you fallen again? He's fallen again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to happen every time without fail. Because his support's not there, and it is that simple.
It is.
So, you know, I remember reaching the point in primary school where I had said, if I could only choose where the support was, it would be less teaching time. It would be, you know, kind of forget about the academics for a little while, and please just give the support in the unstructured times to be able to let them learn how to and catch up with socializing properly, how to play with friends, how to do that kind of thing, how to manage that moving from those different levels of of environment, because it has the biggest impact.
That social interaction, and I think it's probably more so at primary school now, but it may be the case that a child with FASD or suspected FASD gravitates towards the younger children at the playtimes and the break times, because they're able to join in their game. So as we were, you know, talking before about how you have to lower your expectations and half their age, think toddler, things like that. It's because in some areas developmentally that's where they are. So if they're really struggling with those social interactions of their peers, and you know, you've ever noticed a child where you think like, oh, I wonder what's going on there, why aren't they playing with the children from their class? It's because they're not quite
able to
fitting in socially. They don't know how to. They don't. You
know, a typical example might be the quite physically big year 5 who thinks it's funny to get into the middle of the deadly serious football game and just hoof the ball off the pitch or run away with the ball, cause an absolute chaos and to deeply offend the year 5 footballers. But, you know, and just, you know, Macy's being babyish, being silly, all of those kind of things. If those situations are ringing a bell, which they will be, if you work in the teaching field, they absolutely will be, then, you know, that's what you could be looking at. And if you know that that's what you're dealing with, then make everyone's lives easier. Ultimately, yours, the most easier. That didn't make any sense in English at all, but I know what I meant. So ultimately, make your life easier by preempting that and putting something in place. So typically our kids are the kids who thrive on, I've got a little job for you at playtime. Can you help me do this, please? Can you help me move those chairs to there? Can you hand those books out? Can you? And it's like where you would distract a toddler, because you don't want to punish. I remember going through a phase with my children, and it was heartbreaking of like, Mum, why can't we have playtimes? And we were desperately trying to protect them from themselves and come up with these great ideas of what they could do. But to them, it was just like, why can't I go and do that? And it was because it was too dangerous to let them be out unsupervised. Well, even supervised, but this, like, they kind of were caught up in a big vacuum of all of the other kids' emotions and excitement, and for a little while it just didn't work. But you know, where you would distract a toddler from a situation, if you can come up with something where they think, and especially like you said about younger, for a little while, there was a situation where maybe get my daughter to help with the brand new starters. So that's a really, really good way of doing things, because they're in an environment that actually they feel in, because they're pushing themselves all the time to try and hold their own in the chronological year that they are meant to be in, because cognitively they are nowhere near that. So where they think they're going to be the big kid and help out with the little kids, actually you're putting them in a situation where they feel totally at ease and comfortable, because it's the environment they want to be in. And the tricky thing about
jobs as well, like the confidence boost and the independence. And you know, I in a previous job, there was a child in school that we were working with, and just trying to figure out ways of working through all those transitions. And the moment where the teacher says like, oh, can you go and get your book out of your bag or your book out of your drawer, or where, I don't know, wherever primary school kids keep their books. That was a real struggle for this child, because all of a sudden everybody would stand up from where they were and scatter across the room to their drawer.
Scraping the chairs, making a big noise.
All of the sensory stimulated, absolute nightmare. And then sit back down. And you can imagine in a primary school that, you know, there was bumping and I can't find this, and, you know, a chaotic moment. So what ended up happening was children place their books in a pile, and the teacher started giving this particular student the responsibility of handing them out or putting them on desks. So this child was, you know, helping the teacher and also helping each of her classmates and feeling very, very, you know, proud and
accomplished, yeah.
But also having, when dysregulated or having that sensory overload, they would take more books, and the weight of the books walking around the room just settled everything. So nobody was getting up, nobody was scrambling, but for the student, the pupil with the FASD, everything just settled at the exact same time as they were transitioning into this new activity. And that's so simple.
Another hugely important area is consistency and continuity, and quite often that'll be out of your control. Sickness or something happens within the school day, an emergency, COVID, a situation that needs to be dealt with, meaning that either you have to leave your class or you're in another class, or someone, just things just aren't how the child has imagined they're going to be, and that will really, really shake a child with FASD. So I didn't realise that a lot of the bad days would be if there was a supply teacher who just, and even if they weren't doing a particular, you know, even if they were kind of inadvertently doing a pretty good job, just this, it was just too big of a transition. So and there's no way around it. It's always going to happen in education, but just to be very mindful of the impact that it will have.
And it will have an impact. And I do think if you know in advance, if the teacher is going to be finishing partway through the school year or partway through the term, if they are having an operation, if they are moving house, leaving their job, going on maternity leave, you know, any of these kind of things that you kind of know about in advance, start preparing the child as soon as you find out. And as soon as you find out who will be replacing that teacher, even if it is supply teachers, even if it's not set in stone, give them as much information as you can. So if you can make a little book of, you know, like a picture, this is Miss so-and-so or Mr. so-and-so, whoever it might be, and they will be your new teacher, and start working with that. Having said that, make sure you know the student inside out, because you don't want to cause anxiety in doing that. So that's it's something that you can do to reduce the anxieties around the transition, but you've got to be very, very mindful of increasing anxieties around, you know, like, when's this going to happen, they're going to leave, like what's going on. So transitions are tough, basically. There's not that much you can do, but
that ties into the importance of knowing the child and having that relationship with them, and that is absolutely key. So if you're a head teacher listening to this, if you're the person who's in charge of planning timetables, choosing who tutors are going to be, or form tutors, if you can, consistency will play the biggest role in that child learning. Switching up learning support assistants all the time, that is no good. That is no good for children like ours. They just can't cope with it, and they will go into fight, flight or freeze, and they won't be able to engage. They absolutely won't be able to engage. So you've got to really treat that as a top priority. That if you can keep that continuity in any way, then long term you'll need less resource, because that relationship will be as powerful as a team of people would be in any other kind of disability.
Yeah.
You know, so it is worth putting the plan into that, and really understanding the weight of it and the power that that holds, because when that goes wrong, that is a disengagement with education, and then that then becomes the horrible label of a school refuser. When they're not refusing to go to school, they're not able to engage anymore because we've kind of severed all of those connections, and they've got nothing they can hold on to. So that is absolutely vital, because what we've got to remember all the time is this is a brain injury, this is brain damage, and quite often you will have children, young people with FASD who will have a dual diagnosis. ASD, autism, very, very commonly runs alongside. So imagine a brain injury with a brain difference as well. So complex.
And this is what we were talking about with Dr. Raja Mukherjee when he was on and he was interviewing, and he was saying, I'm using my hands again, so if anybody's not watching on YouTube, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but you have this foundation, this bottom layer of FASD that has caused this brain injury. So your starting point is a brain injury, but on top of that, you've got all these very, very, very complex layers of a brain, and you can imagine how that brain has tried to form with the brain damage. And some of those differences that then come look like autism. It might be autism. Look like ADHD. It might be ADHD. But there's 428 coexisting conditions that come with FASD. So you can imagine how complex and messy and confusing all of that gets to try and unpick as a clinician. So when you start seeing it in a classroom, it just keeps coming back to that relationship. It's all about that relationship, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to you as an educator if they've got this problem and this diagnosis and this problem and this diagnosis. You just need to know how it affects them and how you can support them.
And I think that comes back to the knowing the child, and knowing that you, even if there are situations and you think, I don't know what the best way is to deal with this, because through the lens of their FASD and their disability, even if all of this knowledge does, the only thing it does make you have that compassion and that empathy to think, oh my God, I can't imagine how hard their lives are. Even that mindset, whether you are doing it consciously or not, will make you interact differently with that child or young person. Just having that mindset, like, oh man, that's really shitty that you're having to deal with that.
Trying to stay in that mindset as well. That's another element of my PhD that I've just been writing about. But trying to stay in that, because when you're stressed and when you're dealing with like 30 other students and there's a million things going on, and you've got like marking and planning and everything else to do, and there's stuff going on at home, and your boiler stopped working, and you had no hot water this month, all of these things that come into your day as a teacher, you go in with that empathy and you think, oh my God, I can't imagine how, this child, but then something happens and you switch your focus to deal with something else in the room, and it can take a minute to click back in, because it's not in front of you. And as Claire was saying before, it's just how we interact naturally as society, and you're reading people's body language and their expressive language, their verbal skills can be much more advanced than their cognitive abilities. And I think in a lot of cases, there'll be a lot of times of the day where you have to consciously switch that empathy back on and remind yourself that that particular student has a brain injury. because it's
and I think I've got a really powerful example of, and if this sticks in anyone's mind, well, good, it might help you kind of put it all into perspective. But I know a little girl with FASD who used to wish that she had Down syndrome. And when I asked her why did she wish she had Down syndrome, and just very, very matter of fact, and it wasn't feeling sorry for herself or anything, it was just because what she had observed in school was that all of the learning support assistants smiled at the little girl with Down syndrome with kind eyes. They were her exact words. And this little girl could often feel a level of agitation from staff when she wasn't behaving in a way that they were expecting of her. So it's all that, and because that level of empathy and compassion, it will increase your tolerance tenfold.
Oh yeah.
So it will make life easier for you in the long run, because it will make you more tolerant of what's going on.
Have those kind eyes.
Yeah, I know, it's so important. That would never have entered my head until I heard that. I think there's two more areas that we want to cover, because we were trying to give some like really fast bullet points. These are the areas to remember.
We've got too much to say.
Understanding cognitive fatigue and processing time. So understanding that when you give an instruction to a child or young person with FASD, first of all, if it's verbally, they're going to probably be picking, processing. They're going to hear the words, but they're processing about every third word, so trying to piece together what you've asked. So if you at any point can have visual guidance, visual reminders, visual instructions, just for the whole class, they don't need to be singled out, just decide that that's part of your class plan, visual reminders, then that would be much, much easier for them to follow and to stick to and help with their anxiety. Because even if they haven't picked up, or they think they've picked up what you want them to do, if they've got a visual reminder of what the task is, then that'll calm them and they'll be able to get on with it. And the fact that when you ask them to do something, you need to give it about 20 seconds minimum for them to process. If you've asked a question, if you've given an instruction, instructions should never be more than 2 parts. You know, just if you have to give 2 at a time, no more than that. But give a little bit of time for their brain, because their brain is injured, so it processes things differently to an uninjured brain. You've got to give them a little bit of time.
When you're giving that time, do count as well. You know, figure out how long it is that particular child needs, and do count to yourself so that you do it every time and you remember to do it every time. Just in your head, no need to make it obvious. But during that time, I've worked with children who need you to remain engaged in that conversation, even though nothing's being spoken. So need to maintain that eye contact. And in some cases, it's eye contact. This comes back to knowing who you're working with and knowing the individual. But as if you're still mid-conversation, you're fully committed, you're fully dedicated. In that moment, you haven't just delivered it and then gone, flick the kettle on, come back 20 seconds later. Don't flick a kettle on in a classroom, but you know what I mean.
No, I was picturing myself there with one of my sons, and just something as simple as, would you like the strawberry or the lemon yogurt? If I am never getting an answer straight back, because he needs to process that, then make his decision, and then it got to come back out of his mouth. If I walk away and go and flick the kettle on or do something and come back for the answer, I'm back to the beginning again. Which one did you want? What did I want? Mm-hmm. I've just asked you a question, no? Yeah. And it's gone. So you need to wait, and I've learned now, but I used to do it wrong all the time, because I would get so impatient and I would say, you know, stop ignoring us.
Yeah.
This is rude. answer me now, not knowing that I'm like, just may as well just be batting them over the head with a brick. I'm just kind of mushing their brains that much. So that, and so if you think about all of that effort that's going on for them to process, then it'll give you a little way to understanding cognitive fatigue.
Yeah.
So their brains get so exhausted and cloudy and foggy and creaky that there are times when you can just, everyone will know that they've had a situation with a student where they're watching and they're just thinking, the brain's just stopped working, or I've lost them now. And, our kids get so exhausted with their brains working 10 times harder just to process what's going on around them. And that's so understanding that fatigue and the processing time, again, will make your life as an educator easier, because it's all about drumming it into you. And something that I used to do until the talk about fake it till you make it, and because it's an invisible disability, and because brain injury and brain damage are pretty shocking terms, they're quite powerful, I forced myself, not in front of the kids, but I forced myself to use that label all the time. If I was writing up notes, if I was pulling things together, whenever I was talking about it in my mind or talking about it to other professionals, I would use that all the time, because I needed to hammer home and convince to myself that was the severity of the situation. And just use
there as well.
And using that phrase, there's no questioning the seriousness of it.
Well, exactly. But that consistency in language for yourself, and helping to remember yourself, understanding that they've got this brain injury, and that empathy will start to really settle in, so that you don't have to consciously turn it on again. It's there.
It will become second nature.
If you do have to, so when we were talking about that processing and waiting, so you ask about the yogurt, and then you do not go and turn the kettle on because you're back to square one. You stay there, you stay engaged in the conversation as if it's still happening, because to them it is, like their brain, the conversation's still happening. And actually, if you imagine that you were engaged in conversation with somebody and they just walked away, you'd be like, what? What's happening? But if you have to repeat the information and repeat the question again, do you want the strawberry yogurt or the lemon yogurt? Try and use the exact same words as you used before, because if they're only picking up every third word, or if they're still trying to process what you asked before, and you come back with strawberry or lemon, like strawberry or lemon what? Like,
or you may just get
exactly,
Which one would you like?
They'll start responding with what they think you want to hear, or something to get out of the situation. Like, quick, tell them anything. I need to get out.
Get her out of my way so I can put this YouTube back on. So there are so many easy things, and I did want to cover another area, but actually, while I've been talking, it's such a big area that I think it needs its own episode. And
next week.
I'll touch on it a little bit now, but understanding how the school day impacts home life, especially if the school day appears to run smoothly and you're getting conflicting information that, but this is what's happening at home, but I can't have anything to do with school because she's been amazing today. So I think that deserves its whole own episode.
Whole episode on masking.
Because that is a big stumbling block. And again, it's something that as education professionals you can help with immensely, even just by having the level of understanding. Because it must be very difficult to empathise and think, I don't know, I don't see any of this behaviour, so I can't even imagine it. I can't imagine I'm doing that. So we'll cover that in the next episode. So I hope that we've given, what we wanted to do is give you like a little bit of a toolbox so that you can see it's never straightforward educating a child with FASD. It's never going to be straightforward, but it doesn't have to be impossible, and it doesn't have to be as difficult as our education system currently makes it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the key takeaways, we didn't do we haven't done a bullet point list here. And we've talked a lot around every single point that we've tried to raise, because that's just what we do. But the key takeaways here: get to know that individual, really, 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 really get to know them. Get to know their triggers, get to know their strengths, their likes, their dislikes, their hobbies. Just get to know them. Be empathetic, whether that's conscious or unconsciously, just empathy, and slow down and lower your expectations. Any more?
No, I think that's it. And when we say lower your expectations, that might not necessarily, and quite often that won't necessarily mean academically.
Yeah.
But it will cognitively and emotionally. So you have to lower your expectations, because if we can get the right fit for our children, they can thrive academically. But at the minute, we are crushing them, and we are extinguishing any hope they have of thriving academically. And I've said it, and I will continue to say it, that it will look very different in 4 or 5 years' time. I absolutely know that. But for now, you are the frontline people who have arguably some of the biggest impact on these children's lives.
Definitely.
Yeah, so especially care experienced children, as teachers and support assistants and support staff, you've got an opportunity to have a life-changing impact on them. And I think we just want to kind of reassure you that it's not rocket science. It's not really, really difficult to be able to do, and hopefully that will give you the confidence to be able to work on a different kind of level with children with FASD. So as always, thank you for listening. If you've got any questions around education, anything that you want us to cover, anything that you struggle with, you might work with children with FASD, anything that you think is lacking, doesn't get spoken about, please get in touch with us so that we can cover that. And thank you for listening, and we hope you come back again next week.
Thank you. Goodbye.